Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to work on a Penn Senator 30. It's very much the same reel as a Penn 65, with the exception of the additional side plate protection here with metal rings and an additional crossbar. But internally we're going to find out that it's the same. Now this one just came into the shop. It's very sluggish. May need drags, we're not quite sure. We're going to open it up. You can tell that it hasn't been serviced in a while. There's quite a bit of salt spray and the like on the handle here. There's also some salt spray and corrosion starting on the side plates. And the customer just told me it's sluggish. So let's go ahead and take this thing apart. I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how to tune it up. And we'll go ahead and repair this reel and put it back into service. So a couple of things as we start. I wear a protective glove on my non-working hand. That's to keep the lubricants and contaminants off of that as possible. I also use a parts tray for all of my small pieces and parts. And I do that just so that I know where they are when I go to reassemble. So hopefully we'll be able to get these side plate screws out to get started. And you should note as we do this that these side plate screws are different. I can't tell you how many times I take these reels apart and find that they're in the wrong place, but you should have longer screws going into the sidebars and a short screw going into the reel seat. And a lot of times customers, I find, have them reversed. So you can see it here. There is a difference between the two, and just make a mental note of that as you go ahead and do your reel repairs. Another couple of things to note on these is that if you don't work on these reels frequently, take pictures along the way, use your cell phone camera, use a digital camera, use a video camera, whatever. That'll tell you how you took your pieces and parts out, so that if you get stuck on the reassembly of the reel, you can go back to that as a reference. And also you can grab a schematic for the reel, and that'll show you the exploded view of the reel, so that when you go back to reassemble, if you were wondering which way a part went or so on, you can generally see that from the schematic. Now this is not that reel, but this is an example of a schematic that has the bursts of all the pieces and parts. For Penn, those schematics are available at pennparts.com, which is now mysticparts.com. You can go ahead and put in this Penn Senator 30, and it'll bring up the schematic for it if that's the one that you're working on, or any of the other Penn reels that you might be working on or need a part for. So we're going to go ahead now and take that handle off. That handle just lifted off. If you're having trouble getting that handle off, back this star drag nut off, and that'll help you get the handle off. Now this should just simply pull out, but it never simply pulls out. Okay, so we've got the frame off. We've kind of worked that backwards, but that's okay. And now we have the assembly here. Now what we have, I see why it's sluggish, she didn't tell me this, but we have a broken spring here. So this spring was interfering with the operation of the reel. This is the spring that runs the eccentric. That's this free spool assembly. And we're going to have to go ahead and replace that spring. So we'll do that as part of this service and move that on as well. So that's why this reel was not operating properly. I'm also seeing a piece of monofilament in here as part of the brake. So it's quite possible that that monofilament, I don't know if you can see that there, and there's maybe more in here, that monofilament got involved with that spring and caused that spring to break. So we'll go ahead and do that as part of this, and then we'll see how far we can get before we time out on the video. So we're going to take this reel apart then to make that happen. I do that by removing the star drag nut and the ferrule, and then I'm going to remove the side plates here. There's 4 screws that detach the bridge from the side plate. There's 2 different screws. The screws up top are partially threaded. The screws below are fully threaded, and you just need to note that when you go to reassemble. The reason for the partial threading up top is so that the springs from the yoke can ride on that. And we've got a pretty thick grease in this one as well, so go clean that up. But there's a spring on this anti-reverse dog. You can't even see it, gets lost in the the muck and mire there. So all right, so we're going to go ahead and take that off. We'll clean up that spring, clean up this thing, and again you can see why the value of that that protective glove there. All right, to get to that eccentric, then we're going to have to remove this free spool assembly. Here's the rest of the spring, all bundled up there. So yeah, that was quite a mess there. And yep, we have monofilament in there as well. So that's kind of what's caused this thing to go awry. All right, the eccentric, the yoke and the spool gear come off. The two springs come off on the side plate. Boy, he had a lot of monofilament in there. And that's obviously what happened. It got twisted up. Here's another piece of monofilament that broke off there. And that caused quite a mess here. All right, so we'll just grab the screws then. And again, I mentioned it, but there's two different screws. You want to just make sure that you know that the partially threaded ones go up. That's these, and the fully threaded ones belong at the bottom in reassembly. Just take that and clean that up. And we'll just take this out and clean this up as well while we're at it. So I removed the main gear, and I've removed the drag assemblies. These drags look fine. It just looks like there's a lot of grease hanging in them. So I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure that they're clean. They are. We're just going to put this back together then. And these just get put back together with an alternating sequence of metal washers and fabric washers. So we put a fabric in there. Here's your metal, fabric. There's an eared washer which always goes in the middle. That's this one. Now this one was a conversion over from the, oops, that backwards there. This was a conversion from the older ones that had the thick washers, so there's an extra fabric washer in this one. That's what I'm working on right now, putting those fabrics back in, but we're alternating the sequence. Fabric, metal, with the eared. Fabric, metal. All right, so the drag stack then is clean. Here's one more for the collar washer. We're just going to go ahead and set that aside then. While we go just the yoke and spool gear. Just going to clean this up. That's your yoke, your spool gear. So this is it's using the gearing, essentially the gearing of the Long Beach model. It's a bigger gear, lower gear ratio. It's not a high-speed reel like the Jigmaster. It's always been known for its durability. It's kind of one of these bulletproof reels that are out there, and as long as you take care of it, it's going to take care of you. You know that now the red side plated Senators, which are the ones that are on the market, they're high speed. It means that it has a smaller spool gear and a bigger main drive gear for the most part. This one is the older version that's not high speed. And then I don't know what grease was used in there. Again, another reason why I used the protective gloving. But this grease looks way too thick for a reel. And that's why I recommend always using the manufacturer's reel grease or a grease specifically designed for fishing reels. In this case, I use a Penn Reels grease. It's a universal reel grease. It works on any fishing reel. Other manufacturers make the grease as well. and there's third parties out there. Just make sure that you use grease that's designed for fishing reels when you go ahead and service your reel. Okay, so we got to get this eccentric off now so that we can replace that spring. And we're going to hope we have a spring that we can put back in. If not, we're going to have to just realize that we may have to come back to this. So I use a little ratchet on this one. Just helps me work it, but it's connected with a nut. We want to take that eccentric off. Now most of the time I put those parts in the parts basket, but I'm just keeping these close for the sake of knowing that I'm going to just put these back. Now I'm going to have to go off camera for a moment to see if I can get that spring. Parts tray, and we'll see if we have one in here. So if you do this frequently enough, you tend to wind up with the pieces and parts that you need. If you don't do it enough, you have to go order these parts, and the parts are generally available from penparts.com. I'm just still searching for that spring, so just please bear with me a moment. Here we have there's two springs. These eccentrics go from the left and they go from the right. It just depends on what reel you have. In this case we have the one that goes on the right, and we're just trying to find the one that matches up. There's different springs for different reels. They're not universal. And I didn't realize when I was repairing this reel that we were going to need to do this, but now we are, so here we go. Okay, so I have that screw. That's that spring. We're going to push the eccentric out so that we can lace the spring into that little guide hole that is in the eccentric. We can then place the eccentric back in. We then want to seat the spring on the other side of the post here. Which is usually easier to do before you put the eccentric piece back in. Let's go ahead and do that. And to those of you that may have difficulty seeing this, I'm going to apologize in advance. So this is how the spring seats. It seats in the hole of the eccentric, and it seats into the ridge behind that stud. And then I generally use a little bit of a pliers to get that to the flat spot in the return, which sometimes is easier said than done. And you just got to be careful when you grab this. You don't want to mar that, because once you get that set into that flat spot, you'll then have an easier time putting the free spool release handle back on, or lever, and then we can go ahead and put the nut on that holds that. And now we've got a functioning free spool anti-reverse again. So then we're going to just tighten that up. Then you'll see now that we have a functional piece. With that done, we can go ahead and reassemble. We've cleaned up the reel. So let's go ahead and reassemble here. We're going to take those two springs that control the yoke. We're going to put a little bit of grease onto the drive side bearing for the spool. I'm going to go insert the two springs into the carriers. Grab that yoke and spool gear assembly. Put these in place, press down. And then we can put the jack on top. And we're back to where we were with that and with this. So now we have to reassemble and put that anti-reverse stall in. got the anti-reverse dog, and now you can see why I put all of my small pieces and parts into the tray. In this case, I'm just looking for the spring. It's a small spring. It's the anti-reverse dog spring. And we want to grab the threaded side plate screw for the bottom. Now we can reinstall. We're going to push down on the spool gear. I'm going to grab the bridge assembly and insert that. Turn that about 180 to the finished product. Put the anti-reverse dog in so that it rides on the teeth behind the main gear. Grab that little spring that controls the anti-reverse dog and sit that in the channel. Be careful here, that's a spring, it can shoot. But this is how it sits when you're done with the assembly. It rides in that little channel groove for the anti-reverse mechanism. And hopefully you can see that on camera. And then we complete by turning it the rest of the way until we get the screw lined up. And just a partial turn here before we can put the other pieces and screws back together. So we want to take the partially threaded screw opposite the one below. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that, get that started. And I don't tighten any of them down until I have all 4 of them seated. So we'll go over here and put this one together. Get that started. I just heard that click. And then we got one more in here which goes below. And once that one gets seated, we can tighten all of these down. I notice I'm still picking up that piece of broken monofilament. So that seems to have been the problem here. We had a piece of monofilament get trapped behind the spool. It got trapped into the free spool mechanism. It destroyed the free spool release spring and caused all kinds of havoc in the reel. And I guess he recognized it as sluggish performance because the spool was rubbing up against that in the channel. But regardless, it didn't work. So now we got a fully functional reel here, and we're just ready to put the rest of it back together. So the one thing I couldn't lubricate when I was putting the reel back was the jack. We're just going to go ahead and put some blue grease there as well. Okay, we got the channel here. While we're at it, we're going to go put a little bit of grease in that non-gear side bearing. And take the spool, make sure that it's clean. It's got a little bit of shellacking going on in there, so I'm just going to take a paper towel and rub that off. If it was more stubborn, you could use a penetrating oil like a WD-40 or something and clean that up. But in this case, we're just going to rub that out since that spool and everything is clean. We just also want to make sure that there's no fragments of that monofilament left over hanging onto the spool shaft or something. All right, with that in place, we can put this back. We're going to grab that ferrule. Again, we're going to make sure that there's no pieces and parts or any broken line or anything like that as we go to reassemble. That ferrule goes on, and we take the star drag nut, and we can put that over the shaft. There's 2 sides on this star drag nut. There's a shiny side and a less shiny side, matted side, I guess. There's also usually a number stamped in the back. You can see it here. It's stamped in the back with 1060. That goes towards the reel face and not towards the handle side. That's just cosmetic. It doesn't matter which side you put it on, but that's the way it came from the factory. With that, I'm just going to put a little bit of blue grease onto the spool shaft. And then we're going to line this up for reassemble. Now there's 2 studs. There's 2 holes here. There's 2 studs here. That's what you're going to line in for your to get this to seat right. And there you go. We're lined up. And there's only the 1 screw on that bottom. Remember I said that the post screws are longer than the screw for the reel seat. So you'll have 4 that are longer and 1 that's short. And that's how you want to make sure that they go back in. I like to do this just as I did the bridge screws. I like to go opposing corners, kind of northeast south. So we did the or southwest and east. All right, then I'm going to find the short one in the mess, and I'm going to go here. And again, you can see the value there of that parts tray. Okay, 2 more screws to go, and a handle screw, and we're back in business here with a reel that's going to last a long time. So the drags have been serviced. We found the broken spring. We got all the pieces and parts out. We found the cause for that, which was the bad broken monofilament line. And we cleaned all of that out. We re-lubed the reel, checked and made sure that the drags were all in place. Reinstalled the eccentric spring. Now we're reinstalling the rest of it. Tighten down the drag a little bit. Now I'm looking for the... we didn't take that pinion gear off, so we can use reel oil in there. I noticed it was free and spinning. I use a Real X oil, so I just put a little bit of that into the pinion, the gear sleeve. And we can put the handle nut, handle screw back on. Grab my reel wrench. Some folks ask about this wrench. It's an aftermarket product that happens to be available on PennParts.com, which is now Mystic Parts. It's a custom reel. I think Alan Tanney actually produces it, or it might be under his name. It's a little bit wider and a little bit longer for better leverage. If you work on Penn reels all the time, it's a joy to have. If you're just doing this occasionally, use the reel handle that came with the reel if you still have it. It's thin and narrow, but it does its job, right? So, just the word. Okay, let's just see if it was worth our effort there. There you go. We got a nice spinning reel. We got an eccentric that's working now, and we got everything in place to make this a nice turning reel. Put that back in the service. So I hope you learned a lot from this. I got into something I didn't think I was going to get into with that broken spring, but that'll show you how to do that as well. Customer will be happy and will be able to fish this thing for the coming season. So with that, if you liked it, please like it on YouTube. If you want to see more, please subscribe, as I'm doing this all the time. And one last thing I'll leave you with, I'm going to take some WD-40 here. I'm just going to hit that part that was corroded or gathering some salt. And I'll just I'll mop that down with a paper towel before I return it to the customer. So with that, I'm going to thank you for viewing the video. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Appreciate you watching it. Again, if you like it, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Thanks again for watching.